All right, welcome into Notre Dame postgame show at the Voice of College Football. I'm your host, Nathan Erbach. I'm here with you every week, as usual. Ben was actually at the Notre Dame game or Notre Dame USC game today, so he was unable to attend the live stream. But I'm here with a good friend of mine, Danny Cunningham, Notre Dame fan himself. And covers a lot of sports for ESPN Cleveland and different things like that. So he's well versed in everything that we're going to be talking about here and just in sports in general. So welcome to the show, Danny, and we'll go ahead and get this Notre Dame USC review started here.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here. Thrilled it's after a win, and honestly, Nathan, it's after the game. I think that Notre Dame has looked the most comfortable this year, which I think coming off the bye week's a really good thing.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned the bye week. I mean, there were certainly a lot of things, I think specifically with the offense, that, certainly, progressed, I guess.
Sure.
During the bye week. I mean, obviously the tempo was big from, the first series on. They got Lorenzo Styles Jr. involved, which I think was huge for them. Losing Joe Wilkins for the season, Lawrence Keys transferring out of the program. I mean, those were two depth guys that weren't necessarily going to be, big components of the offense, but certainly guys that, you were going to count on in certain situations. Obviously, Joe Wilkins had the touchdown in that opening game against Florida State, which is a big one. And then Lawrence Keys has had, moments here and there for Notre Dame, but getting Lorenzo Styles the ball, I think first and foremost was huge for Notre Dame. And then certainly the tempo, like we already mentioned,
yes.
With Jack Cohn specifically.
So I think the one thing that's really interesting about Cohn that I just thought of here, and maybe they mentioned this briefly on the broadcast, but Cohn has played a lot of football, which is great, but he hasn't played a lot of football for Notre Dame. So he's not learning how to play college football anymore. He knows how to do that, but he's still learning how to play for Tommy Rees. And Tommy Rees is still learning how to coach for Jack Cohn. And I think that's why we're starting to see nights like tonight where we finally found him look comfortable for really the first time since week 1 against Florida State. Everything was out quick, and I thought that was exactly what they needed to do offensively. The only time where he looked rushed was on that very slow developing screen pass, and it worked out perfectly, really.
Yeah. And it's funny. I think we as fans and analysts have been kind of calling for the tempo or at least the quick game with Jack Cohn in there. And we saw that, I think, or at least to the biggest degree today. And it certainly looked like it worked in their favor. And I would imagine that this will be something that they stick with for the remainder of the season. And I should have mentioned this before, before we even got really started. Danny, you covered Wisconsin football for a little bit.
Correct.
And before Jack Cohn was the starter, but you still have a little bit of, maybe familiarity with him as a player and a person. So you can certainly provide some good intel that maybe others could not, just from both of his stops. And I think what you kind of hit the nail on the head is, he's played a lot of football in his days, but at the same time, he hasn't necessarily played for Tommy Rees, hasn't played in this kind of specific style of offense.
Mm-hmm.
Notre Dame's not the most explosive offense like an Alabama, Ohio State, teams that just tend to score on 4 or 5 plays, at will. But there's certainly a more explosive offense than what he was running at Wisconsin.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. There are not very many offenses that are less explosive than what Cohn was running with the Badgers. And part of the time he was there, and it's great that he gets to play with Kyron Williams now, but he did get to play with a better running back at Wisconsin than Jonathan Taylor. Like, I have no doubt about that. So that's kind of where the similarity is that they played with great running backs, but there wasn't a Kevin Austin at Wisconsin. Jake Ferguson's a really nice tight end, but he's not Michael Mayer. And Danny Davis is a fine wide receiver, and Kendrick Pryor and those guys are all fine, but they just don't have the skill position guys from top to bottom outside of Jonathan Taylor that Cohn has at Notre Dame now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and one guy you probably failed to mention there was Quintez Cephas, who's probably the best
Sure.
receiver that's come out of there in a while.
And
But
but he essentially missed a whole year when
right,
Cohn was
that's true.
there because he was dealing with an off the field issue that he basically was cost a year of football. So he didn't have that time with, or Cohn didn't have that much time with him.
Yeah, certainly a fair point. Another thing, and this was something I was sort of preaching, at least in my podcast, the Golden Homers podcast, um, earlier this week, was the idea that it was pretty much guaranteed that Cohn was going to start this game, at least based on the way the coaches were talking, the way the depth chart was set up, so on and so forth. Um, and with that, the idea that Buckner could come in and sort of be a change of pace guy, and when he does come in, he maybe gets a little bit more of the offense thrown his way instead of it just being Jack Cohn has struggled for a couple series, or the offense has struggled under Jack Cohn for a couple series, and now we're going to go to Buckner or Pine full time. And I think what we saw today was exactly how we want this offense to be utilized with both guys. Jack Cohn's going to be the better natural thrower at this point in his career. If
Sure.
you run the tempo and you give him time to throw the football, he's going to make some plays for you. And then when Buckner comes in, he can stretch the field not only with his ability to run the RPO, or at least put the defense in different situations, but he can also throw the ball down the field, and he showed that a few times today as well. So I thought it was a perfect game plan overall from Tommy Rees. And then obviously the players, I think, ran it, maybe not to perfection, but certainly better than I think that they have been running it all year.
Yeah, it's hard to have a lot of complaints about today. And you bring up Buckner, and it's no secret that they think he's the future of this program. And it is nice to see the offense opened up a little bit for him. I know he only attempted 2 passes. I think one of them was a short one. The other one was a legitimate just drop back pass, which, when he made his debut against Toledo and he was in earlier in the season, he wasn't doing that type of stuff. So seeing the playbook opened up for him in that aspect is a really fun thing. I think that's a great development. And it's hard to give a freshman quarterback everything all at once. It's hard to just say, here's everything, go run it to perfection, especially when it's a kid that really only played 1 year of high-level high school football because of the pandemic. So it's kind of difficult to do that, but seeing him progress, and I think some of the things he did tonight, I wouldn't have been confident in him doing against Toledo. And that's a big step. And he's going to need to make mistakes like against Virginia Tech a couple of weeks ago. That was always going to happen with him. Now, luckily Notre Dame was able to get out, survive that game with a win, but it's all part of the maturation process here.
Right, exactly. And you're talking about a kid that missed his whole senior season of high school football, missed his sophomore year of high school football as well. So, in reality, only really had that one full season. So not only is he a raw player or came in as a raw player, but obviously the talent's there, and like you mentioned, I mean, it's going to certainly continue to grow. And I think we're seeing that almost every game he plays in. I mean, you saw it in the game against Virginia Tech at times. I mean, when he first came in, I mean, those first couple drives were awesome, and really kind of highlighted his strengths and sort of the future of this offense, hopefully. And then today, you saw that sprinkle of it at the same time. And I think I even tweeted out, I think it was his first completion. I think it was to Michael Mayer across the middle of the field. Cohn doesn't have the zip on the ball.
No, he doesn't. So obviously I'm in Cleveland and I'm a Browns fan. And as the rest of the nation was treated to Thursday night football this week, we all got an up close and personal look at Case Keenum. And I think that's who Jack Cohn kind of reminds me of a little bit after watching that this week and then watching Cohn all year. It's just like they're kind of similar in who they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, guys, you're listening to the Notre Dame USC post-game show at the Voice of College Football, Mark Rogers TV, if you're looking for it on YouTube or anything like that. Certainly give us a like on the Notre Dame platform. We're trying to get to, I think we're a little over 500 followers right now, trying to get over to 600 and 1,000 down the line. If you really like what you're seeing, give us that super chat as well. And you can Venmo that to Mark Rogers or the Voice of College Football on Venmo. and certainly do it on YouTube as well, and just let them know that you're following the Notre Dame chat here. Danny, I want to talk about the defensive side of the ball a little bit. It kind of reminded me of the Clark Lee defense.
Sure.
Of past years. I mean, not super turnover heavy, a little bend but don't break. And I think that's exactly what happened today. The bend but don't break. I mean, they allowed a few touchdowns, in that late third, early fourth quarter. But overall, they only allowed, 16 points to, I think in reality, even though USC is kind of up and down and, who knows what they're going to be over the next couple of years when they get a new head coach, but they certainly bring, they certainly bring in talent. And,
I think USC is probably the most talented team on their schedule.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Drake London's probably the best player they're going to play all season.
Yes. Yeah.
He might even be the number one wide receiver in the class. I think he was a kid that was certainly on the radar of the NFL coming in, but this year he's shown a lot. And I think Kyle Hamilton even made some comments prior to the game that if he played wide receiver, that's exactly the type of player he would be. And I think as Notre Dame fans, we kind of agree with that. I guess we can't really mention Kyle Hamilton either without, hoping that injury is not too serious. I mean, he didn't come back, but
with the way he seemed on the sideline where he was walking around and, trying to stay engaged in the game, that leads me to believe it's not serious, because if it were something bad, I don't think he would have been on the sideline. It stinks he didn't really get to play tonight because of that. I think it was the first or the second series defensively, the second series, because the first series was 3-and-out. So it stinks that happened, but if I had to bet, he's probably going to be back sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he misses next week against North Carolina. Notre Dame obviously showed what they could do last year against North Carolina when Hamilton misses that game, and North Carolina is pretty shaky. But I think Brian Kelly mentioned that he doesn't believe that there's any ligament damage there, which is great. I mean, maybe he has an MCL sprain or something. Hopefully it's not even that serious to where he's going to miss multiple weeks, but at least it's not a Jalen Smith level injury where it could possibly ruin his NFL career. And that's the first thing I thought of when it happened. I was like, how many times does Notre Dame have to have an elite defensive player get hurt right before the draft when he's a top 5, top 10 pick?
Yeah, that would have been absolutely brutal, man. Would have been terrible. I'm very thankful that's not the case.
Yeah. And I do, it's weird. Kind of going back to the defense a little bit. I do think people are being a little harsh on the defense. I mean, I think specifically for, just because most of the year they've kind of had to, hold down the fort and kind of get the offense out of some bad situations. And today, maybe it was the other way around a little bit. The offense was, pretty much, I think, drove down the field outside of 1 3-and-out. They had the pick, but that was when they were driving as well. And they had a missed field goal on the first drive, but, pretty much every drive they were able to produce points or close to it. So, I mean, I think today was an anomaly of sorts for the defense, but even then, I mean, they still only gave up a point. They had pick in the red zone.
And they had the fumble recovery at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's one of those things where, I mean, the whole game, I think, is part of what people miss sometimes. And, they see USC driving down the field, but then, like I mentioned, like Notre Dame has the pick and almost a pick six. And that's still a huge part of it. I mean, that's locking down in the red zone and making a play. And that's what good defenses do. And that was right after the Hamilton, right after the Hamilton injury. Defense certainly, crap the bed right from there on out. And I don't believe they really did.
No, definitely not. And, it did feel like that Clark Lee defensive performance, but at the end of the day, they created at least 3 plays that were worthy of turnovers, right? We saw the 2 strip sacks. One was recovered by Notre Dame, one wasn't. And then the interception by Bauer that could have been, that was almost returned all the way for a touchdown. But even in the third quarter, Notre Dame, I don't want to say had that game in the bag after the first drive, but they were up 24-3, right? At early on in the third quarter. At that point, if you give up a touchdown drive, but it's 5, 6, 7 minutes, the clock is your friend. You have to be willing to exchange 6 minutes for 6 points, which is exactly what they did, especially if your offense can go right back and score, and then the game just gets shorter, and it keeps getting shorter and keeps getting shorter. And that's what Notre Dame did. So I don't think that there's any issue with the defense after tonight.
Yeah, and we have a comment from Gary Lewis kind of mentioning the fact that if we catch a strong passing team in the New Year's Six, well, it could be embarrassing. But I think, again, that kind of plays into, Kyle Hamilton didn't play the majority of this game. And, not only is he the best secondary player in the entire country, he might be the best defensive player in the entire country, along with, Kayvon Thibodeau at Oregon. So I'd like to see a healthy Kyle Hamilton if Notre Dame is going to be playing a pass-heavy team, which I think USC is. I mean, Keontae Ingram I think was great on the ground, but overall they are an air raid offense for a reason. And like you mentioned, they probably have the most talent of anybody on Notre Dame's schedule. So even though USC is shaky for sure, they will put up points against most teams they play.
Yeah, that's never been their issue for the most part. They've got a ton of talent, and it's just the way that talent gets managed and developed is certainly disappointing if you're a Trojans fan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like one of the things I have not done on this post-game show enough is praise Kyron Williams.
Sure.
Every time I watch him play, there's just like you want to say special almost to an extent. He's definitely a guy that knows where the first down marker is.
Yes.
And you can't say that for a lot of guys. He had the big third down, like it was a 3rd and 13 catch there right before the interception. That was a huge play. He gets in the end zone most of the time when you don't think he's going to be able to reach there. And I don't know. It's just, even with his pedestrian numbers this year, I guess, at least from a rushing per attempt, maybe, at least going into this game, I think it was 3.9.
I feel like you can't put that all on Kyron. Because last year his numbers were great, obviously, and he got a ton of praise, and deservedly so. And I think he can be a better running back this year and have worse stats. I think that's a very possible reality that we're living in.
Yeah, I think he's certainly a better player. And he's 1 year older, and he's one of those guys that unless you're watching the game, you really don't realize how good he is. And that's kind of why I mentioned the stats, is that you look at it, maybe his rushing yards, or at least his yards per carry, and so on and so forth, and say, okay, how is this kid going to be a 1st or 2nd round pick? But when you really dive into what he does on an every down basis for this team, pass blocking, catching the ball out of the backfield, like I said, somehow finding ways to just pick up first downs when you don't think he should be able to. And then on top of that, I think he's just a tremendous leader. He's vocal. He can certainly get into the head of the other team when he's on. And I think those are things that you don't put in a stat sheet necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. He's the heart and soul of this team. I don't think that there's any questioning that. Everything can't be put in the box score, but even when he's not having a great game, as far as rushing yardage totals, his impact is always felt. And to me, that's certainly one of the marks of a great player. And I really do think Kyron Williams is that. I'm excited to see him at the next level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think he's going to be one of those guys that if you put him on the right team, specifically, he can make noise probably year one.
Yeah, certainly.
Another thing I wanted to mention today was the offensive line. I thought last week was probably their best performance, and then I think this week topped it. I think maybe having Joe Alt and Andrew Kristofic as the main two at left tackle and left guard for the majority of the game, or the whole game for that matter, probably played a role. They're starting to build a little consistency there, and I think they're actually getting into a better part of their their schedule when it comes to maybe playing some weaker defenses too, which helps.
Definitely.
But they had some push today, specifically early on. The first half, I mean, I thought they pretty much were able to do whenever they wanted to. And, you know, whether it was running the football, giving Cohn time, I think he was, if I remember correctly, only sacked one time, which is doesn't seem like a Notre Dame stat from this year.
No, my goodness, no, it does not.
But definitely looked more like Notre Dame offensive lines of old, or certainly an offensive line that's progressing into what could be a really good offensive line, you know, next year and in years after.
It was a group that always going. I don't think that there's been reason to question the talent on the offensive line because, and you know better than anybody, just how well they've been able to recruit this position. Well, those positions, I should say, but it was always, they were always going to need time to become what they're starting to become. That's the one place that you need time to gel. You need time to figure it out as a group. And they've kind of done that now. It's just, it took them longer than we would have liked because everyone wants things to happen instantly. And unfortunately, it doesn't do that, but they look good now. And that's, if this team is the best version of this team come maybe a New Year's Six bowl, that's a successful season because they're continuing to get better. And that's all you can ask for.
And I think that's an important note. I mean, for as interesting as this team has been to watch the majority of the season so far, if they're playing their best football at the end of the season, then, you know, this could be a team that ends up going, you know, 12-1, possibly. Yeah. You know, 11-1 with a New Year's Six bowl win or whatever bowl they end up going to, and then people will look back on this year as, actually very successful overall. And I think me and you both agree that the program itself is at a point where, you know, going like 9-3 and less is kind of unacceptable at this point, regardless of, you know, some of the struggles that they've had this year. But this is easily a team that should be 10-2, 11-1, with New Year's Six aspirations. I don't think Notre Dame's a program that should have necessarily playoff aspirations every single year, at least until they move to the 12 team, playoff or whatever.
If that happens, that's going to have to be their goal every year. But right now, I think if every recruiting class that you sign has at least one playoff appearance, you're successful.
Yeah, and I think right now they're proving that even maybe two of those classes could possibly end up being there. And next year's schedule, and I think the 2023 schedule lend themselves to, if Notre Dame's really good, they'll probably make the playoff both years, just because of who they play. But no, I think it was certainly nice seeing the offensive line play well. Like I mentioned, regardless who they were playing, I think it's a nice confidence boost. They also happen to have two of their top offensive line recruit targets in attendance in Billy Schrauth, who they're battling for with Wisconsin, ironically enough. And then Emil Wagner, I think, was also in attendance. He's a kind of a Kentucky, Ohio State, Notre Dame, battling out with those three teams, it looks like, and they were both in attendance. So nice to see them maybe have their best performance of the year with those guys in attendance, and then also probably their best offensive performance or team performance, I should say, this year with their biggest recruiting weekend, at least since 2019, considering last year there were no visits.
So you are obviously much smarter in the recruiting world than I am. What does a night like tonight do for this program when this is their biggest recruiting night, where they've got, close to 100 different prospects there? What can a night like tonight do for the program?
I think the biggest thing, people need to forget about the win and loss aspect of it, I think, to an extent. Obviously getting around the coaches is huge. Getting around players that maybe a lot of these guys envy is huge. And then getting around the commits and stuff like that are guys that are already committed to the program is big. But not only that, but I mean, I think kids want to see atmosphere, especially the big time ones. I mean, guys that are getting recruited by every team in the country and have been on, 5 to 10 visits, throughout their high school career, and they're going to Alabama, they're going to, Texas, they're going to Ohio State, they're going to Michigan, and then they end up at Notre Dame, having a night game against your rival at USC, where predominantly Notre Dame fans, because Notre Dame does tend to sometimes not have, I mean, predominantly they do, but there are definitely times when they play like a Georgia or a Nebraska or, whoever at home, those teams
teams that wear red, and red really stands out and makes it look like there's more opposing fans than there actually are.
Exactly. But I think the good thing about USC being their biggest rival is that USC fans, being from the LA area, can be somewhat fickle. And I don't think they always travel well. And because
especially
they play
not
Notre
to
Dame,
Northern Indiana in late October.
Right. And I think their players said best in the, what was it? I think it was Keontae Ingram in that video that went viral when he found out it'd be 40 degrees. So certainly, but yeah, no, USC is obviously one of the best programs, historically, but their fan base, like I mentioned, kind of like Dodger fans, can be a little fickle at times, and, they don't necessarily travel well. And so having it be a sold out crowd, from the looks of it, with Notre Dame, having a really nice performance, that's always going to be something. And so I guess to answer your question a little bit better is it really just comes down to what these kids are looking for. And when they see it all come to fruition, like it did today, I mean, they had a 5-star QB commit from LSU in town as well. And this was probably their best passing performance of the year. Maybe albeit Florida State. It certainly seems kind of like on, at least from watching, like I said, like sometimes paper stats are paper stats. Today just felt like a better offensive performance. And so Walker Howard being in attendance and watching that, I'm sure that helps a little bit. And, he's used to seeing LSU home games, and with his dad being a former LSU player, I'm sure he's grown up going to LSU games his entire life. Being able to see something maybe a little bit different, like he did today, maybe that can change a kid's mind. But I think the night game against your biggest rival certainly doesn't help, or certainly doesn't hurt.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too.
Got an interesting comment from Bow Down to Ohio State Dynasty. And I know there's not too many people that hate Ohio State more than you, Danny, so I figured you'd enjoy this one.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Notre Dame's not Ohio State. But in the same breath as this comment, Ohio State lost a game to a team at home as well that has a loss in Oregon. And the Notre Dame loss to Cincinnati wasn't great. And yes, USC's not terrific right now, but the programs are having very similar seasons. They're both starting to play their best football right now. Neither one of them looked very good early. Both of them have a loss. I think if you're commenting on a Notre Dame video at 11:30 at night on a Saturday, Eastern time, that is, I know you are not in the same time zone as I, Nathan.
I'm going out after this. I don't know what you're talking about.
Then I think that probably speaks to the relevancy of the program, because if they were really irrelevant, your level of care would be much lower than commenting on our video.
Yeah, not to argue too much with the commenters, because we do enjoy it, and bow down to the Ohio State Dynasty. Hope you comment some more, because it's certainly me and Danny can certainly handle the banter. I'll say that. But,
and also, Ohio State's not a dynasty. They've won one national championship in the last 20 years.
And there you go. Notre Dame's won one in the last 30 or whatever. So it's pretty close. But no, with that said, one thing I was going to mention is one of the things I love about the Notre Dame Isn't Relevant crowd, and essentially going based on what you said, is they consistently have some of the best viewerships of any program. And that's, obviously they have their own network, and I'm sure that helps, but having their own network plays into the relevancy just a little bit, I think. And the fact that they haven't won a national championship since 1988 and haven't, really been maybe considered the best team since like 1993. Ironically, the year I was born.
Me too.
So there you go. But no, they're always going to be relevant. They have one of the biggest brands in the entire country, and I really don't think that can be argued. Like you mentioned, they're not Ohio State, they're not Alabama, they're not Clemson when Clemson's good, because Clemson certainly isn't good this year.
No,
but
they're not.
And they're not this air raid offense like the Oklahomas and stuff bring. But I mean, I don't think that you're going to find 7 or 8 teams that are consistently better than them, at least since 2016 or since the 2016 fiasco.
Yeah.
Looks like some comments are starting to roll in, but this one's an interesting one by Johnny Bays because it's actually true, because we're technically we're simulcast on the Notre Dame channel and the live channel, so you can kind of click on multiple different ones here and go from there. So happy that you guys are with us if you're following this one, and we'll continue to kind of push forward. Danny, did you have any other sort of just observations from today's game in general?
I think the biggest one is that they just it's the most comfortable they've looked playing this year, in my opinion. And obviously USC is not the worst team that they've played all year, but Notre Dame tonight finally looks like a Notre Dame team I expect to see when I turn on the TV every Saturday. And I haven't always been able to say that this year. So that was certainly the most refreshing part of tonight. And it excites me for next week and the weeks to come.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing for me, is that I'm sort of a little bit like rejuvenated, I guess, for the rest of the season. I mean, we've kind of already touched on it, and maybe this is the game that kind of gets them, clicking on all cylinders. And at the end of the year, they're playing their best football. And like I mentioned, possibly going to a New Year's Six bowl and winning that for the first time in a while as well. No, it would have been fun to, or it would be fun to see if this team kind of, like I said, puts the pieces together, plays better offensively. I think the better offensively they play, the better the defense is going to continue to improve this year overall. So yeah. I think and on the screen here, part of the game plan, bend but don't break defensive strategy. I do think that was part of it today. They wanted to keep Drake London in front of them. And it seems like every time they play USC, that seems to be the strategy. They've done that the past couple of years when they played Amon-Ra St. Brown and all those guys a few years back. That's USC for you in a nutshell, is that they want to beat you over the top. They want to air raid you. They're not going to necessarily run it down your throat all the time. But when Notre Dame does play them, they do tend to have some of their best rushing games, simply because Notre Dame's trying to keep them from, completing 50-yard passes down the field. So I think this game from the defensive side of the ball is more of an anomaly than anything else.
I would agree with that. I don't think that anything tonight that Notre Dame fans saw should cause any concern, with the exception of Kyle Hamilton's injury.
Right. Absolutely. And then I think it kind of goes to this comment too that I'm about to throw up. Let's see if I can find it again. Right here from Joseph Barrett. This is really where I think I disagree overall. I mean, yards are yards. Yards don't necessarily equal points. I mean, if you look at some of the Clark Lee defenses of old, teams put up a lot of yards on the Notre Dame defense. But if you're a team that can hold in the red zone, if you're a team that can commit, costly turnovers on the defensive side of the ball, if you can rush the passer with 4 when you need to, then I don't know. I think are a little too unfair to the defense, specifically with how much they've had to bail out the offense this season.
I don't understand calling this a poor defensive performance when they ultimately allowed 16 points. In today's college football, that's nothing. That's a great performance defensively. The yardage total was a little high, but like you said, yards don't equal points. You could give up 600 yards and pitch a shutout. The chances of that happening are slim, but you can do it. And Drake London had 15 catches because USC threw to him almost every play. How many of those catches were catches that were behind the line of scrimmage? This game as far as what Drake London did was basically Sammy Watkins against Ohio State back in the Orange Bowl, way back when, with the difference being Notre Dame was just the better team tonight and was able to do that. But some of those catches for London were essentially run plays. That's just how they wanted to get him the ball. I mean, you see him on a speed sweep and the ball gets tossed forward to him. That's a catch. Okay. But like, it's a lot different than him running 75 yards down the sideline on a go route. I would rather, have 15 catches. How many times do you find the end zone?
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think, like I said, I think people forget that they only gave up 16 points. They won by 15. Like you mentioned earlier, they were up, 24-3
Yes.
at one point. So when you're up 24-3, you're going to play a little bit of prevent D. The USC has the capability on offense that when you play prevent D to move the football. Mm-hmm. And then I think first and foremost, and we've touched on this a little bit, but Drake London's also just a really good football player that also had 20 targets.
He's going to be a first round pick. He's good.
So yeah, no, and I think Johnny Bays kind of said it best here. When your teams are going to pass on you, when you're up, you're going to give up some big plays. I think that also opens up the running game. I'd like to see, and I don't know this off the top of my head, I would like to see what Ingram's stats were from the first half to the second half, because it did look like he was able to start picking up more chunk yards.
Oh, no doubt about that. He was much better in the second half than the first.
And then I don't want to keep arguing with Joseph Barrett here, because he did say respectfully disagree. I don't think he remembers the Marquise Step game when Clark Lee was the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame. And it was exactly the same thing, where Notre Dame had a commanding lead, or at least kind of like they sort of had they kept
USC at an arm's length all night long. That was a game. If there was an extra quarter, USC might have been able to find a way to win that game. But Notre Dame kept going up by 10. USC kept scoring a touchdown, cut it to 3, back up by 10, cut it to 3. That's what the entire second half was. I believe that was the Marquise Step game you're talking about.
Yeah, and if it was, then like I said, we're talking about a couple games against USC where I think we're kind of getting this revolving door of what happens a lot of the times when they play USC. Notre Dame usually gets out, at least recently. I think this is now the 4th game they've won in a row against USC. They typically get out to a pretty good lead. USC has shown in recent years to be, susceptible to letting teams get to bigger leads. They commit penalties, they commit turnovers, and then they have to kind of crawl their way back in. And like I've mentioned, and you've mentioned, they have the athletes to kind of crawl their way back in. And I don't know. Like I said with Joseph Barrett, I mean, I obviously respectfully disagree as well. If this is something that's more of a trend for the remainder of the season, or with Kyle Hamilton out, if Kyle Hamilton's going to be out the remainder of the season and it's a trend because of that as well, then we might have a different discussion. But let's see what happens next week against North Carolina first before I'm going to, I guess, complain too much about the defense as a whole. And he actually is here overall. One thing I'd to find out, or what his stats were prior to the second half of that game, because I would imagine it was a lot worse.
Yeah, I'm going to search for that because I'm very curious now.
And then Jimbo has a good point, and this is kind of something that we brought up, is that USC had some yards to the air. Drake London had 15 catches, whatever it was, but they didn't actually have a passing touchdown either. So
So in the first half, Ingram had 53 rushing yards on 10 carries.
So he was pretty good most of the game in general. He had a better second half than he had a first half, but
the third quarter is where he did most of his damage. The third quarter is where he did most of his damage.
Absolutely. And I do agree with this. They did have some missed tackles today. I thought Tariq Bracy specifically in the slot played great. There was a few plays that he was able to blow up in the backfield. I think one specifically with London where he sort of kept him from picking up the first down or whatever. But that was something that they need to clean up a little bit. It was an issue the first few weeks of the season, and I don't think it's going to become a trend because it really hasn't been a trend for the majority of the year.
And let me say, USC's got some really good players. They're going to make guys miss tackles at times. When high level talent goes against high level talent, one side doesn't always win.
Yeah, no, that's true. I want to throw in a joke one here for a second from Bow Down to the Ohio State Dynasty. Ironically enough, his son is currently on scholarship at Notre Dame, so he does have eligibility left.
4 years.
I don't know if he knew that, but I figured I'd at least throw that in there because it's at least a little ironic and funny to me. This one, if you were able to see this specific, I know you said you missed part of the.
I did see this play. And I thought Terry McCauley explained it well on the broadcast that that's a play that should have been reviewed. And he thought that Kevin Austin had the ball first and should have been able to hang on with the catch. And, you'd like Austin to bring the ball into his body, but that's a really tough play as a receiver and a great play by the defensive back. But that's a play that I would have loved to see ruled in favor of the offense, because if you do have that simultaneous catch rule, it's kind of the definition of it.
Yeah, and I struggle with that one because I will say, watching it live, I thought it was an interception. And
I did too,
Yeah.
But watching it slow down, I thought it was a catch.
I will say, watching it slowed down, I thought it was more of a catch. It's one of those things where I think sometimes common sense plays a factor in sports. And I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the fact that people thought it could. I mean, sometimes rules are rules at the same time.
Yeah.
But just watching it, it was hard for me to really disagree with the call. It felt like the USC guy had more of the possession, I guess, if that makes any sort of sense. And one thing I kept thinking to myself is if somehow Kevin Austin was able to sort of flip his body after kind of snagging it, and then he was the one that landed on it with his chest, then maybe that's where you get that simultaneous for Notre Dame.
Yeah,
I think they actually had one last week that was simultaneous that they called for Notre Dame, and it was a lot more obvious that it was the offensive player that they got. I don't know if you remember what play I'm talking about. I don't even know if I remember what.
Well, I think it was an interception.
Yeah, you're right. It was. Was it the Tariq Bracy interception last week? Maybe
I'm not sure.
But that one
2 weeks ago. I'm struggling to get my.
That's true. Yeah, we just have a bye week. But that one just looked a little bit more obvious to me. This one felt a little bit more like Chris Steele actually had possession. But I do agree with you. I mean, I think McCauley explained it really well.
I would agree.
And I'm sure once he explained it, Notre Dame fans got a little pissed off. Let's see here. This is a call that I think Joseph Barrett agrees with us on in that regard. So that's good. We're starting
I'm glad he's on our side now.
We're just messing with you, Joseph. I hope you know that. This is another one I wanted to get to. It looks like a USC fan has kind of hopped on board here. Saw a lot of comments about if Jackson Dart ended up playing this game that it might be a little different. I will admit I have not watched a lot of USC games this year.
Neither have I.
So I can't really comment, but I do trust the people that I have heard kind of talk about it to an extent. But it is interesting because I remember when Slovis was the true freshman, he came in, he looked really good against Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And then he was, I think it was going into last season, people were talking about him being maybe the number one pick in the draft in a couple of years. And he has seemed to kind of fall off. And I don't know if it's his fault or if it's somewhat the coaching's fault, but
I mean, time and time again, we see guys that just don't get developed at USC.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair statement. I mean, either that or we think they're developed and they don't end up being the player that we thought they were going to be, or at least at the NFL thought. I mean, Mark Sanchez was like the fourth pick in the draft or whatever, and had I think a decent NFL career to start, but sort of fizzled out. Matt Barkley was I think overall a pretty terrific college football player, but didn't really work out in the NFL. Matt Leinart, the same thing, and he was probably someone that everybody thought was going to be a really good NFL player. But
turns out he didn't have
it's
the arm strength.
Yeah. And, I guess we can't say much because Notre Dame hasn't had much success with quarterbacks either, but I also don't think they've been really known for quarterbacks, at least under the Kelly regime overall. They are kind of like Ohio State outside of Justin Fields, maybe. They bring in guys that kind of fit the offense more than anything. I mean, Brandon Wimbush was supposed to sort of be that guy, and it turned out he didn't even have the accuracy to really compete at the college level. But then you brought in a guy like Ian Book, who took over, and obviously he was a really, really good college football player as well. Maybe couldn't get Notre Dame over the hump, but certainly was able to win them a lot of games against some really good football teams.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, Notre Dame's, as far as quarterback goes, the highest. I mean, Brady Quinn was a first-round pick so many years ago. Deshaun Kaiser was a second-round pick in 2017. Ian Book was a fourth-round pick. Outside of that, I'm struggling to think. I mean, Jimmy Clausen was, a third-round pick?
He was a second-round pick. He was a guy kind of like at the USC, like maybe like a Slovis, where people thought that he could have ended up being a first-round pick, and then he sort of
he was one of the top recruits in the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was maybe even the number one recruit in the country.
He might have been, yeah.
This is an interesting one. I know, and I know me and you both like talking recruiting, just in general. We sort of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I don't mind kind of getting back to it. And you actually mentioned it, but Notre Dame did actually have over 100 recruits today on campus. I think they actually had 10 or so basketball recruits as well, so that's always a fun time. But yeah, no, I mean, it was a really good day. I mean, I can run down a few of the guys, and I know, Danny, you're going to know a lot of these guys' names too, so feel free to chime in on maybe some of your thoughts. But I mentioned a few, and, 5-star QB Walker Howard was on campus for an official visit. 5-star safety out of Iowa, Xavier Nwankpa, was on campus as well. I don't believe his was an official visit. I think he took his official during the summer, but again, getting back to Notre Dame for a game day was great for him. Billy Strouth and Emil Wagner, both offensive line guys that they're hard after. Specifically, I think Billy Strouth, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he committed here in the next few days. I think Notre Dame's trending up there. Hero Kanu and Anthony Lucas, probably two of the best defensive linemen in the country, were both on campus as well. Heroes was or Kanu's was an official, and Lucas's was not. He took an official visit in the summer as well. And then they had most of their 2022 class in attendance, so that was certainly good to get a lot of these guys around them. And then I think your favorite people, I don't know if Sonny Styles ended up making the trip or not. I think he was supposed to, but I didn't see anything about him being there. But I know you text me almost every day about him. And then 5-star linebacker in the same class, 2023, Drake Bowen, out of Indiana, who's actually going to announce here on November 7th. And if I were a betting man today, I would pick Notre Dame to win that recruitment. In-state kid, and he's down to Auburn and Clemson. He was also on campus. So, but a slew of other 2023 kids. I'm sure I missed a 2022 kid here and there. And then they also had 2024 kids, and then they actually offered their first 2025 recruit today. And I think it's Ryan Montgomery, who's a quarterback in the 2025 class out of Findlay, Ohio. And his brother is actually a big-time 2023 recruit for Notre Dame along the defensive line. I think he can also play offensive line. So getting in with that kid early, I think, probably helps them with their brother as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's great to have a huge recruiting night like this seemingly go as smoothly as it did.
This is a good one from Jimbo. Recruiting O-lineman does not sell tickets. I tend to disagree a little bit. I think Notre Dame sells the tickets just fine. I don't know if that was a bash on Notre Dame or not, because he did say USC sucks because of the lack of offensive line right before that. So I'm sure it was more of a bash on USC, but at least in Notre Dame's case, I do think that recruiting good offensive line play helps, and you can see that with this year.
Quite a bit.
Offensive line has been. Notre Dame fans are pretty pissed about that. But and then he said, okay, 3 kids from California in the top 100 offensive line. So I don't know. Maybe Jimbo's talking himself out of it.
Could be.
Yeah, guys, you guys are listening to the Notre Dame USC postgame show here. We're about probably 50 or so minutes in now, about an hour or so after the game ended. Notre Dame beat USC today, 31-16. And again, we're on the Voice of College Football. We're here with you every week. Danny is someone that I've actually wanted to have on a few times. I'm happy he was able to join. So maybe next week and a few other weeks, me, you, and Ben can kind of do a trifecta here and go off each other a little bit. So certainly nice having you on for sure.
It's great to be here. I'm thrilled that we could finally make it work.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like the comments are kind of slowing up a little bit, so we might maybe just finish up here with a little maybe UNC preview. Just sort of what we've seen today from Notre Dame and what we can expect. I mean, obviously, UNC's not having the year I think that they expected.
No, not at all.
Not good defensively. They don't protect their good college quarterback in Sam Howell very well, and I think people are maybe underestimating the fact at how much they lost last year. They lost their 2 best wide receivers, their two best running backs. And I do agree there's some comments running in that say UNC can score, but they haven't necessarily shown that at times this year. I think it might actually end up being a similar game to USC, where Notre Dame's able to get up to a 20-something point lead, and then UNC maybe puts up some numbers late that makes it look a little bit, better overall. But I think a 31-16 type victory wouldn't surprise me too much.
No, I'm in a very similar boat as you there. I expected at the beginning of the season Notre Dame to probably drop one of these 2 games against USC and UNC. And now I would be stunned if they lose. Obviously, they beat USC. I'd be pretty surprised if they lose next week to North Carolina. I expect Notre Dame to build on what they did tonight. I think they're going to look good again next week. I don't think North Carolina has the same level of talent that Notre Dame does. And if they can't protect Howell, they've got no shot.
Yeah, no, Notre Dame has proven that on multiple occasions against maybe even better teams in North Carolina, that if your weakness is along your offensive line, specifically over the last couple of years, and you're playing Notre Dame, you're probably in for a long day because they can get after the quarterback with even just 3-man fronts. They showed that. I think it was the very first play of USC's of the game today, or at least on the offensive side of the ball for USC. Jason Adamalola got in there on a 3-man front and sacked Keaton Slovis, and they don't mind doing it with blitzes or anything like that either. So if could be a very long day for Hal, and maybe even a longer day. Maybe even a longer day than it was for Keaton Slovis overall.
Yeah. It's that has to be the goal for Notre Dame's defense next week.
Absolutely. And then actually one more quick thing, because a question kind of came in. I don't know if you want to touch on this one a little bit, or if you agree with this comment that came on. I tend to agree at least a little bit. I don't know if they can really boost their resume per se. I mean, I do think going 11-1, if that were to happen, does say something, whether it's the committee or the AP polls or just the national media. When you go 11-1, you're going to get some respect.
Sure.
So from that aspect of it, I think that their resume could be boosted. And if they look really impressive, like just much better than they had the previous, 6 games, and then they look more like they did today against USC, specifically offensively, because that's really what people look at. I think overall, if your offense looks good, they kind of just assume you're a better football team. Yep. Because that's what people like watching. So if they have more games like today overall, I think that will help. But I do agree. I mean, their schedule doesn't lend itself to say, okay, Notre Dame can really get back into the playoff talk, at least in my opinion. A lot of things would have to go their way.
No, you're right. It's they don't have that marquee matchup left. They're not going to have a ranked team on their schedule when they play. Maybe if everything goes perfect for Stanford by the last week of the season, they could be like number 25, although I doubt it. Basically, they need to look dominant every week, and that's the only thing that could really boost their resume. And at this point, I don't know that the college football playoff should be the goal for this team with one loss. I think it should be finding a way into a New Year's Six bowl and winning said New Year's Six bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but it would be their first time doing that in a long time. So just doing that, I don't care who their opponent is. It could be a mediocre Texas. It could be Michigan. It could be Alabama. If they win that game, I'll be happy that they did it.
Me too.
And I think even going a step further with your point on their resume, I mean, you really look at it, their best remaining opponent, at least from a record standpoint, is probably Virginia. And I think that's a road game. But even then, if they were to beat Virginia, that's giving them 3 losses. So there's not that marquee matchup like you mentioned.
And that's if Virginia doesn't lose between now and then.
Sure. And I think it's 2 games before that. So I wouldn't put it past Virginia to win a game. I think they snuck a win against Georgia Tech this week. They won 48-40. So if that doesn't show you that they can lose a game before then, I don't even know what their schedule is, but it just wouldn't surprise me, like you mentioned. All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for us. We've been going strong here for about 56 or so minutes, almost an hour. We average, anywhere from 20 to 30 people on here at one time. So pretty good. Thanks for all the comments. Like I mentioned earlier, don't forget to, give us a like, throw a comment, after this is posted, and then come down next week. When after Notre Dame plays against UNC at home as well. So we'll be here. We'll be back. Maybe Danny will be with us, but hopefully for sure it'll be either myself and Danny or myself and Ben Belden, who's typically here. So Danny, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. We'll see you later.